I had the opportunity to research your practice over the past 5 years, and there's this very distinct turn that has happened quite recently. From 2019, your practice previously had a look into the fantastical and this idea of weird becomings, portals, and there were these pastel luminescent motifs in various imagined shapes. So from there, your practice has become a lot more grounded in reality, I would say, and you've seen these changes towards focusing on fibrous, suspended works, these ideas of ropes, boundaries, and a look into composting, environmentalism, and things that are more ecologically grounded. So what led to your fixation towards ecology and ecological mark making in your practice?
I suppose what instigated that shift was, I think, like everyone in Australia, like the past 3 years has been very tumultuous, and like I finished honours in 2019, and then straight after that was like the Black Summer bushfires, and then COVID, and then I moved up to the Northern Rivers and was in the Northern Rivers during the 2022 floods as well. I wasn't personally affected, but just seeing that kind of ecological like upheaval like that comes with like natural disasters is quite like, I think it's impossible to not be sort of swept away by it, and to respond to it. And I wasn't living in the city, I was living on the coast, and then moved up to Northern Rivers like regional area. So I think being immersed in, I suppose, nature during that time, it moved me a lot. And so I think the shift sort of moved away from like a kind of human perspective towards looking at a sort of ecological perspective. Also, the work I was making at the end of 2019 and early 2020, I was working with quite large scale sculptural paper mache sort of sculptural reliefs, and it utilized the process utilized a lot of synthetic material, and I found that really hard to kind of reckon with as all this stuff is going on. You just feel like you're kind of part of the problem, or contributing to the problem. So I had a couple of years between graduating and when I started my PhD of not exhibiting a lot, just a little bit, but mostly just playing around with materials at home and just seeing how I can kind of respond to different. My work became a lot more site specific. So looking at the areas that I was sort of frequenting, every day, like the coast or whatever, and looking at ways to respond to those areas with an ecological focus, not only conceptually but in the material kind of process of my making.
Because it's become quite a object-driven process that you've developed just this year, where you've got these leaky exchanges between various things like glass, shells, and plastic debris, and you've done this very subtle reconstruction of a lot of the material components to all these works. So there's this mediation between, turning a shell into a bronze piece, or making a round bottle something that is now flat. And it's this careful consideration of slightly altering the understanding of an object, where it requires enough engagement with the object to kind of see where that change has been utilized. But I'm kind of interested in how that aspect of your work came about, and where those changes kind of occur and why.
I think my practice is at the moment focused on responding to like a particular site, which is Arakul Beaches in northern New South Wales, like around the Byron region. And so I'm using materials that kind of speak to the ecology of the site, but trying to kind of interact with the site in really gentle ways, so non-extractivist sort of ways. So for instance, like speaking about a work with like slumping a glass bottle, or with this work, they're t-shirts that have been stripped into yarn and then soaked or dyed by wrapping around rusted car bodies that were dumped in the dunes. And so there's this kind of, I'm responding to this site, which is quite a tumultuous and fraught sort of space. Like the beach is, really exposed. It's constantly transforming and moving. And I think that kind of comes out in the work. So it's this sort of transformation or meeting of materials, transformation, things kind of like seeping into the other, and clashing, but then also like coming together, falling apart. And I think that's really reflected in the nature of the site. That's really how things kind of interact within the beach.
And even in this exhibition, there's this really great kind of curatorial gift that this dividing line kind of achieved, where we've got Christie's works, which are effectively the ocean, and then you've got Joyce's works, which are the microplastics on the beach, and you've got Crystal's works, where there's this accumulated human to non-human interaction with seaweed. Your work kind of stands between the two and then moves a dividing line between works that are either forested or more urban focused. So it's this great placement that kind of just happened in an unintended way. And it does speak a lot more to the erosion basis of your work, where you've got, I think reading your statement, you said in 1974 there was a cyclone, and it's been this repeated process of building these unstable seawalls that aren't lasting as long as the people that put them up intended, and that they become almost ominous, right? There's this idea that things won't last, like the forces of nature are almost omnipresent or overpowering, and it's this I guess ruinous futility to the sands of time. And how does your engagement with the particular site, how did that develop?
I think I keep sort of thinking about this recent article I read. It's an interview with a Australian named Marnus, and she talks about the kind of ecotone of like the coastal environment, and you've got these two sort of seemingly from a kind of dominant perspective, separate domains, land and water, and within the beach, like they're sort of coming up together and kind of clashing, but then transforming one another. And I just think I grew up on the coast, like a lot of Australians do, and I think responding to this kind of space felt quite, excuse the phrase, but natural to me. But also, I think it's something that progressively I've sort of observed, not only in the Northern Rivers, but along the whole east coast of Australia, is where council has allowed houses to be built on the foreshore of the dunes, there's this really intense sort of tension between like these multi-million-dollar properties and the ecological infrastructure that has now been put in place to kind of protect them. And you know, how the kind of beach transforms around this infrastructure as well. And it's this really strange idea that, you know, you've got to kind of keep out or ward off like the sea and the income of the tide, but really like there's no separation. Like the dunes, it's all a part of an ecology, and the houses that have now been built on the foreshore are now a part of that ecology.
Yeah.
And there's no way of kind of separating the two. They're interdependent,
yeah.
You know?
And there's a really interesting kind of discussion we had a couple of weeks ago where you said you kind of wanted to take it one step further, where the sand would actually become a component in the casting process in future works. So one, I'm just always fascinated by casting as somebody who's casting predominantly in my practice as well. But yeah, things such as patina with sea salt and all this, I just wanted to hear how did the casting come about, but also where is it going?
Yeah, I mean, the casting for me seemed like a logical step because you know, I don't really, it's tricky. It's like responding to a site, there's all this amazing material, but I really wanted to kind of carefully handle that material. So casting replicas of things seemed like a logical step forward. So casting replicas of shells. And the shells really are kind of an extension of this idea of like a protective shell. So referencing this concept of like boundaries or barriers that are seen not only from an anthropocentric point of view, but also through ecology, like non-human ecology too, within the beach, and it being in this work, you know, sort of tied together. So the casting, also bronze, you know, I was really fascinated by the way that verdigris kind of develops on bronze, and you can. I was working with a glass artist at the time, and he mentioned that an eco-friendly way of patinaing bronze would be to either piss on it or spray it intermittently with salt water.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, that works.
Yeah.
And in this instance, you know, I haven't sealed the bronze, so they will continue to weather and transform in this space. And I think that's really important to me, is sort of thinking about, like, for this work, but also thinking about the intertidal zone, thinking about ecology as well as, like, you know, the environment specifically, that nothing's like fixed. We're all kind of weathering together and changing and transforming anew, and I think that sort of necessitates care. Yeah.
And things like ceramic shell and all I think it's like zircon or something like that.
Zircon, yeah.
Zircon, yeah.
I'm interested in the future working zircon. I don't know how to pronounce it. Essentially, it's a refractory material, and it's quite interesting in the coastal areas that I've been looking at in the northern rivers. Sand mining was a huge industry in the early 1900s to like the 70s, I think it was, and it's contributed that, as well as obviously the frequency of natural disasters, as well as increasing rising sea levels, have sort of eroded away the dunes in this area. And so the sand mining, that was to mine the mineral sands of these beaches, and one of those minerals is zircon and rutile and ilmenite, I think. And this is a really, like, you know, long story, which is probably too much information. But zircon is used in the casting and refractory industry. And so moving forward from this, I would really like to kind of reclaim. So in this sort of bronze casting process, reclaim the foundry sand
Yeah.
or foundry casting, ceramic material
And
to
it is something that you can
to work
keep
with.
onto the bronze pieces itself, because it's
Yeah.
something that you
Well, that's something you do
showed
in your
over hammer.
practice.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff. So
Yeah.
my last question is, your work kind of reminded me of a poem, Ozymandias by Percy Shelby, and it's got a line here which I wanted to kind of read out, which was, "Half sunk, shattered vestiges, round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." And I think it relates a lot to these monumental, multi-million-dollar mansions that come about. This idea of the sand eventually spilling into the pool house. And my question is, what can ecological mark making do to warn of the future, and kind of what the human condition can cause in these instances?
I think by following materials, what I've found in my practice is that it's sort of, you cannot separate climate change or the sort of environmental imperative that we now face today. You cannot escape it. And if you follow materials for long enough and closely enough and stay with them, for instance, rust or something, they lead to kind of these very pivotal sort of moments in time. For instance, car bodies being dumped in the 70s following a cyclone that, eroded the dunes or whatever. And then that sort of led to me researching the sand mining industry. So there's something that, if you follow the materials, and in terms of ecological mark making, you're working with these materials as a way of producing work or generating work, then there's really important things to say about the impacts of anthropocentric thinking and seeing the world as sort of, or the environment as a space to kind of be extracted and mined, and kind of blindly, taking things without considering the actual broader repercussions and the ecology that we are also a part of. And it has a weird way of sort of turning in on itself, with these houses that are that are positioned on the precipice of the dunes, we rely on the dune, these houses rely on the dune structure to remain erect. So it's it's all interconnected.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And I think that's a lovely note to leave it on. Thank you so much. And what an awesome work. And
Thanks,
thank
Daniel.
you.